Welcome back to the Tempo Storm Hearthstone Meta Snapshot Breakdown for June 18th, 2017. The meta hasn't shifted much in the last few snapshots, but let's take a look at what's changed in this week's snapshot in Tier 1. Iterations of stable deck archetypes continue to cause dynamic changes in the tier list, while new deck lists have shifted to Tier 1 and shuffled previous Tier 1 deck lists to Tier 2. Control Mage remains at the top of the tier list for another week, but Secret Mage has continued its fall from grace all the way to Tier 2. Secret Mage does really well against Quest Rogue, but it isn't performing against the Token Shamans and Pirate Warriors that are flooding the meta. Speaking of Quest Rogue, it's jumped from Tier 2 to Tier 1 because of the popularization of a new deck list. This new deck plays defensively by adding a Tar Creeper and 2 Hungry Crabs. To make room, this list removes 1 Vanish and 2 Bilefin Tidehunters. Quest Rogue has very polarized matchups, but since aggro decks aren't as popular, save for a few Druids aggro lists and the occasional Pirate Warrior, this deck now feels like a powerful choice in good hands. The other curveball regarding shifts between Tier 1 and Tier 2 revolves around Paladin. In the last meta snapshot, both aggro and mid-range Paladin were holding strong at the 6th and 3rd spot of Tier 1 respectively. Aggro Paladin has since dropped to the bottom of Tier 2 due to the popularization of aggro decks such as Aggro Druid, Pirate Warrior, and Token Shamans who are able to handle the early game of most Murloc decks. Mid-range Murloc Paladin may have dropped a few spots, but it can still hold its own against popular decks like Token Shaman and other aggro archetypes, and even mage decks if the player happens to get a strong opening hand. The freshest decks this week are Tier 1's Freeze Mage, as well as the newer iterations of Control Priest, which now sits just outside of Tier 1 and has great matchups across the board, except for Quest Rogue. Control Priest was more recently refined during the publication of this meta snapshot by Jackie Chan into a Miracle list, and Kolento reached rank 1 legend with it not long after. The newer list is completely different from past iterations, but you can't argue with results. If you want to play a Priest deck that keeps the opponent's board clear and attempts to use Lyra to win slower matches, try the list we posted in the meta snapshot. If you're looking to play a more classic style of Priest with Injured Blade Masters and Circle of Healing, you can try Jackie and Kolento's iteration. This deck focuses on drawing and saving spells for a huge Lyra swing turn, then buffs the 7 health Injured Blade Master with Inner Fire and Divine Spirit to end the game. Freeze Mage isn't exactly new, but with all the discussion on Gunther Mage or Secret Mage, this archetype gets lost in the shuffle very often. However, just because this archetype isn't talked about doesn't mean it isn't formidable on ladder. With the boost Quest Rogue has received recently, Freeze Mage is able to lock him out, along with many other Tier 1 minion heavy decks. With Ice Lance rotated to Wild, this deck relies on Antonidas and Primordial Glyph to obtain more burn just in case the old Alex double Fireball Frostbolt for 15 damage doesn't work like it used to. In this coming week's meta, it'll be a bit easier to discern the archetype your opponent is playing due to 6 different classes being in Tier 1 with only 1 class as a duplicate. This breathes diversity into the ladder, which can make it difficult to target opponents in their decks. Keep track of the types of decks you're facing on the ladder and play against what you're seeing most. If you're playing against a lot of Freeze Mage or Murloc Paladin, try playing Control Mage with an Eater of Secrets. Play the deck that gives you the highest win rate compared to what you're seeing on the ladder. With the return of Quest Rogue and Token Shaman becoming more refined, some aggressive decks may have taken a back seat. Aggro Druid and Pirate Warrior still hold their own with a decent enough curve. Control Mage and Freeze Mage are both very powerful in locking your opponent out of the match while you gather resources to burn them out. Take advantage of the diversity in the current state of the ladder. Tier 2 lists can often prey on some or most of the Tier 1 lists. If you can refine them to counter what you're seeing on the ladder, you should have no trouble in climbing. If you enjoyed this meta snapshot breakdown, consider leaving us a like or favorite, and please subscribe to stay tuned with all of Tempo Storm's news and Hearthstone content.